Where were they when Iran used diplomacy as camouflage while it prepared for our extermination? They were silent. They were complicit. They were afraid. Last night, the United States acted with incredible bravery and morality. Now, the rest of the world must show its gratitude. Iran's reach extends far beyond our borders. It arms militias in Iraq, it commands terror in Lebanon, it funds Houthis in Yemen, it plots murder in Europe, and it threatens every capital in the West with its growing arsenal of ballistic missiles. You cannot sit this one out. You cannot condemn the firefighters while the arsonist tries to light more fires. You cannot protect peace by appeasing evil. To the Iranian regime, understand this: any further attacks against our civilians will be met with overpowering righteous force. Unlike your actions against our civilians, our strikes will continue to target military and nuclear facilities. We will defend our people. We will not hesitate. We will do everything necessary to secure our future.
Well, let's speak now to Michael Singh, Managing Director at the Washington Institute for Near East Policy and a former Senior Director for Middle East Affairs at the National Security Council. And you're in Switzerland, Michael. Thank you very much for taking the time to speak to us. Hello to you. Your reaction, first of all, to these events?
Well, I think President Trump had sort of telegraphed to the world now for the last week that he was seriously considering doing this. We had seen the military moves coming together. And so I think it really can't have been a surprise to anyone, including to the government of Iran. And that's part of the question here is, how much notice did they have? How much were they able to take sensitive items out of the sites that were attacked? And therefore, how effective ultimately was the American strike and what needs to be done next?
What does need to be done next?
Well, I think the question now that the U.S. will look at is how effective were the strikes? It's one thing to have, successfully hit, say, that Fordo facility, the one deeply buried underground. But Vice President Vance alluded, for example, to the fact that the Iranians have been able perhaps to move their enriched uranium stockpile out of that facility. And so it's possible now the U.S. needs to try to hunt that down and conduct further strikes as necessary. And look, having crossed this Rubicon, my guess is you may yet see further strikes.
So it won't be a quick action. That's the impression that Pete Hegseth gave to reporters, that, look, this is, something that we want to do. We have an objective in mind, and we pretty much are sure that we have achieved it.
That's right. I think as he said, it won't be open-ended. So we're not going to see, Iraq 2003, let's bring democracy, let's change the regime, unless we end up in a sort of retaliatory spiral. And then who knows, frankly, where it goes. But we may, I think, yet see another, possibly another day or two of strikes as opportunities arise, as targets are located. Again, having taken this massive step, you want to do the job properly. That, I think, is actually why President Trump struck when he did. Israel sort of began this military campaign, and it was imperative for the United States to ensure that Iran's nuclear program was finished off once this had begun.
And what does a retaliatory spiral look like? Would Iran have a focus on the Straits of Hormuz, on closing those, or on some cyber attacks, or more direct attacks on US interests in the area? What do you think Iran's next move is most likely to be? Because most analysts agree that it can't be seen to be doing nothing.
Well, I think you said Iran can't be seen to do nothing in response. And I think that's key, actually. I think Iran will at least want to be seen to respond in a significant way because it won't want to project weakness. But the reality is that there is a spectrum of options available to Iran, ranging, from easy to quite difficult, ranging from risky to perhaps less risky. And Iran has a massive decision ahead of it now, whether it wants to really try to now engage U.S. forces and invite further American strikes. And that is what could trigger that retaliatory spiral. If you hit American forces or bases, if you hit energy interests shipping or try to close the Strait of Hormuz, that's very different than, say, perhaps mounting, a sort of a more symbolic attack or a cyber attack or something like that. And so this now is the burden is on Iran to decide whether it's going to try to match the U.S., to try to escalate, or sort of engage in a more symbolic retaliation.
It really is hard to overstate what a potentially significant, potentially dangerous moment this is. Last night, the US launched military strikes against Iran. They say they used their stealth bombers to target 3 nuclear sites. They say they destroyed them.
Completely and totally obliterated.
The Iranians say they didn't. But either way, this really is a major escalation in the war that Israel and Iran have been fighting. Direct involvement of the US in military confrontation with Iran takes the Middle East into uncharted and very unpredictable territory. So how's Iran going to respond? Well, they are faced now with the world's most powerful military, and Donald Trump has said they need to surrender. But they've said that is not an option. It would be a crushing humiliation for the regime, and one they're going to avoid at all costs. And this morning, we've seen how they initially planned to respond. There's been a huge number of ballistic missiles fired into Israel, and some of them have got through. But that isn't the only option they have. Now, they've got a network of these proxies of allies around the region. Hamas and Hezbollah, those are in Gaza and Lebanon, they've been very badly weakened. But the Houthis are still around and say that they will be launching attacks on American shipping. There's also the option to close the Strait of Hormuz. That's one of the world's busiest shipping lanes, and that could do real economic damage. So while the Iranians are in a very tough position, they're not completely out of options. And they've said that they are going to have all those options on the table. So what about the rest of the world? Well, there aren't many things that unites the international community these days. It may be that a desire for de-escalation here could be one of them. And the statements we've been seeing from around the world seem to be calling on all sides to calm this down. We saw the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres say that this was a dangerous escalation and asking for calm. But in reality, there's only 3 sides that matter here. That is the US, Israel, and Iran, and none of them seem keen on backing down anytime soon.
Well, the US Secretary of State Marco Rubio has been speaking to CBS's Margaret Brennan on Face the Nation today. Mr. Rubio answered questions about the US strikes on Iranian nuclear sites that happened, of course, last night.
So far, it does not appear that Iran has yet retaliated against the United States. What intelligence do you have at this point about their capabilities to respond, the intent of their proxies? Is there any kind of command and control structure left to activate them?
Yeah, well, we'll see what Iran decides to do. I think they should choose the route of peace. We've done everything. We have bent over backwards, okay, to create a deal with these people. Steve Witkoff has traveled the world extensively, met with them. Well, not even met with them, met through the Omanis with them and discussed back and forth. We even put an offer to them that they wanted elements of it in writing, and we offered it to them. Very generous offer, by the way. We've done it, and we're prepared right now. If they call right now and say, we want to meet, let's talk about this, we're prepared to do that. The president's made that clear from the very beginning. His preference is to deal with this issue diplomatically. But he also told them we had 60 days to make progress or something else was going to happen. And I think they thought they were dealing with a different kind of leader, like the kinds of leaders they've been playing games with for the last 30 or 40 years, and they found out that's not the case. So this mission was a very precise mission. It had 3 objectives, 3 nuclear sites. It was not an attack on Iran. It was not an attack on the Iranian people. This wasn't a regime change move. This was designed to degrade and or destroy 3 nuclear sites related to their nuclear weaponization ambitions.